Test 1 2.
Test, test. Can you hear it? I don't want to be heard.
I think we are probably close enough to the witching hour that we can begin. We have a quorum, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 5, 6, okay. This is, we're called to order the meeting. This is a continuation of the public hearing that began last week on January 15th, 2019. And we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, before we get started, I want to sort of go over the ground rules again for those of you that may not have been here or heard this last week. This is to hear public input on policy CKA or rule CKA, whatever we're calling it. This is the rule that would allow under Wyoming statutes teachers to carry concealed weapons and the terms by which they can do that. The school board will not be responding to any of the comments this evening or answering any questions. This is your opportunity to let us hear what you have to think. And then next week, next Tuesday at 6 p.m., we will be having a work session for the board to discuss all of the public comment that we have received both in writing and here at these hearings, and to talk about where we go next. If you come to the podium, if you have something to say, we would ask that you come to the podium. State your name, whether or not you're a resident of the district, and your affiliation, if any. In other words, are you a student, a parent, a citizen at large, an employee of the district? Just let us know sort of how you're affiliated and whether or not you're a resident of the district. The public hearing will be closed this evening. This is sort of the last opportunity for the public comment. So if anybody is watching and has something to say, we would encourage them to come down. And with that said, I will note that on our desk, we do have some items that have been given to us by Ms. Jorgensen. There's a statement, and I believe 1, 2, 3, 4 articles. One, a quick look, 250 active shooter incidents in the United States from 2000 to 2017. Another one from on U.S. school shootings in 2018. There's another one from, it looks like, an education week on school shootings. And this one looks like the bbc.com webpage on shooting incidents. So we will add those to the record, as well as the written statement. And then obviously if you want to come forward, you can do that as well.
And then also, Chairman Bracken, I would like to make a motion that we again limit public comment to 10 minutes or less per community member.
Okay, we have a motion to limit the comment to 10 minutes.
Second.
Second by Caleb. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. All right, any opposed? Last week, we were able to get it done in 10 minutes. I don't think anybody went over, and I actually was doing the timing as well. So if you can't get it done in 10 minutes, maybe you can turn the time over to someone else to finish your thought. With that said, we will open up the microphone to the public.
Thank you. I just want to do some cons for the guns being in the schools by the teachers. I am against it. I have a lot of passionate feeling about it, but I just wanted to go over just a few points that I thought were important, and I just wanted my voice to be heard. I just feel like most teachers do not have the temperament to be put into the position of protecting students with a firearm. They don't have the training necessary, and I know we've said that there's going to be training, but I just think it's a horrible position to put them in. Also, they're caregivers. Teachers are caregivers. They're not gunfighters. It's just important to remember that. I just think that we're putting a lot of pressure on them. Passing out more guns is not the answer. I think there's a lot of other methods we could use, and I think we really rushed into this as a board and as the community. I just think it's not a good idea. There's a reason why we have law enforcement, and there's a reason why we have teachers. I mean, if we put everybody in a position that cares for children, we'd be putting guns in the hands of doctors, waitresses. I mean, everybody, it just is not good to have more guns. It's just not. Personally, I don't think. I think this is a short-sighted, unsustainable, poorly thought out, knee-jerk solution. It's not a good solution at all. The cons just are so much more outweigh the pros. Children could get caught in the crossfire. Police being unable to distinguish the shooter from the gun-toting teachers. Teachers missing, it just would be a horrible situation. Teachers leaving the classrooms, leaving, I know that there has to come, we have to keep our kids safe. I think we all want that. I know we all want that. But there's other solutions and other measures I think we can look into for this. It'll collapse the learning environment. My son, who is in 3rd grade at Aspen, talked to me about the lock boxes the other day. He's scared of it. He's like, Mom, is there a gun in there? I said, no, honey, not yet, but there's a possibility. He's like, Mom, I don't like that. What if someone gets in there? It scares the kids. It scares my son anyway, and we haven't talked about it much. But he's aware. And the kids talk at the school. They know what they're about, and it scares them. The lockdown drills are also scaring him as well. He's not comfortable with it, and it worries me. He had a nightmare about it a couple weeks ago. And we talk about how to be safe and what, we're all trying to make you safe, but he just isn't comfortable with it. And I think a lot of kids aren't, if you were to really talk to the kids. I think we're just putting a lot of stress on the teachers. Teachers who are already underpaid and overburdened, having to take on the added responsibility of defending the students. It's just a lot on their shoulders, I just think. I just wrote down some pointers here. And we can't just arm teachers and expect them to know what to do. I think we're putting a lot of pressure on them. You have to make sure their judgments under pressure will be appropriate. And it's not a good idea. More guns is not the answer. It's just simply not the best for our children. There are different approaches and things to help make our schools safe based off of more evidence. More research needs to be done, and I hope you take that into consideration. And I thank you for your time. Thanks.
Mr. Rigby has just told me he is going to be the signaler if you've got 5 minutes left, or 1 minute remaining, so.
I think that'll stay. All right, I wrote this down, so I'm not going to look at you guys very much because I have a lot to say in a short amount of time. My name is Tiffany Hope, and my family resides in this school district, and I also have children currently enrolled as well. I have gone through all of the CKA policy documents given online, and during the Christmas break, I submitted my questions through Google Docs. My hope is that all of them will be addressed. As someone with a background in regulatory, I am aware that rules can be left up to interpretation, and when rules aren't well defined, there are simply too many loopholes. When we are talking about guns in schools, ambiguity is something we simply cannot have. This policy must be the absolute best that it can be. I don't know if the Google document is currently available to anyone who wants to see it, so I want to highlight a few of my concerns here. Because these employees are not professionals who live day in and day out carrying a weapon and who have experience dealing with those who seek to harm others, is there enough training being required to prepare an employee for the chaos and stress that is an active shooter situation? The policy states 16 hours of how to use a gun and 8 hours of scenario-based training. That's 24 hours of training, which can be knocked out in 3 8-hour days. Is that enough to prepare a teacher to potentially have to shoot one of their students? Why is authorization for the board to have access to the psychological records stated as being voluntary? Is the background check meant to capture everything from misdemeanors on up? Why are employees who carry only required to report charges of criminal acts to the superintendent and not to the board? What is the district's plan to ensure the budget is there for this policy in light of statewide budget cuts to education? Our children's safety is of the utmost importance. However, you are in the business for providing an education to our kids. So what is the compromise between the two? This policy requires psychological testing, training, and random drug screening for all participants. When budgets are limited, will these standards be upheld no matter what? And when budgets are limited, what will be given up at the schools in order to fund this policy? There are consequences listed up front, including the possibility of termination to the applicants and participants if they don't maintain confidentiality. But what are the consequences if a weapon is left out, regardless if a child gets a hold of it or not, and why is this not spelled out up front? What percentage of testing is the district aiming for to ensure carriers are not under the influence of illegal drugs or substance abuse? In the past, there has been hesitation to test bus drivers because they don't like to single anyone out. Is this going to be an ongoing practice with armed employees? If it does happen that there is a school shooting and an employee responds to stop the incident, what is the district's plan to take care of its employee who volunteered and covered his or her portion of the cost to be a concealed carry employee, should said employee be involved in a situation where they have to respond? This question applies to medical costs, both injury and mental health, any legal suits that may result, and the death benefits in the event of a fatality. To state clearly, I have no problem with guns. I grew up around them, I was taught how to use and care for them, and most importantly, I was taught to respect them because I have seen what they can do. My children are being taught the same lessons because while I can control their access to guns in the home, I cannot always control their exposure outside of the home. I know there are many who fear guns and want nothing to do with them. They don't have guns, and it's often the case that their kids aren't taught anything about guns or guns other than to fear them. As parents, we tell our kids not to do all sorts of things, whether it's touching the hot stove when they are little to drinking before they are of age, and we all know that telling them no can give them an exciting mystery to the very thing we don't want them to do and can lead them to do it anyway. There have been many stories in the news of weapons being left places they shouldn't be. In June 2018, a deputy in Florida left his gun in the Burger King bathroom. That same month in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, a man left his in a bathroom at a supermarket. And in July 2018, a woman left her handgun in a bathroom at the Living Planet Aquarium in Draper, Utah, as just a few examples. We are humans and mistakes happen. What continues to nag at me is what happens if an employee makes an honest mistake and leaves their weapon somewhere in school, likely in the bathroom, and it's found by a child. And what if that child has been raised in a home where they haven't been taught to respect guns and the unthinkable happens? Last week, 2 of our local pediatricians cited the statistics for accidental shootings, which are significantly higher than statistics for school shootings. With this policy, we are willingly inviting that statistic into our schools. Last week, someone asked, if you vote against this and a kid gets shot, are you going to tell the dead student's parents that their kid is dead? Please consider the alternative. That if you do pass a concealed carry policy, especially a weak concealed carry policy, and a kid gets shot because they got access to a gun that they shouldn't have, are you going to go and tell a student's parent that their child is dead? I'm not saying our kids should not be protected because they absolutely should. There is no question about that. What I believe is that we are taking a knee-jerk reaction to horrific events and are looking for the heroic solution instead of the smart one. Worst yet is that we are doing it out of fear because decisions that are driven by fear aren't always the best decisions. What other options did we consider? Have we looked into the possibility of using the grants that another commenter brought up to fund paying for law enforcement to be present at every school every day? Did we look at installing metal detectors when we converted to the new access system? And why is the new access system stop someone at the door, but as soon as the door is buzzed, they have access to the entire school instead of only having access to the front office until they've been vetted? Last week, someone mentioned that having a sign at the school stating that there could be an armed teachers inside would be enough of a deterrent, to which I respond that for people in the right state of mind, the people who are not going to shoot up a school, yes, that would have an impact. But people who shoot up schools are rarely in their right minds, so a sign is going to have very little impact. Signs simply won't be enough, but is a policy allowing guns at school going too far? It is really easy to say what you would do if you were in an active shooter situation, but until you are, you really don't know how you would respond. There are simply too many variables that you cannot know until it happens. People, even well-trained officers, can freeze. District employees are no exception to being human. I leave you with this. This policy takes a reactive stance that is designed to respond to the threat of an armed intruder. Why aren't we looking at preventing this from happening in the first place? Monica Vazakis made some compelling arguments last week about this very thing. I ask that you please review what she said because I truly believe we would all prefer to prevent something like this from happening than have it happen and need to react. And if it's not clear, I don't think this policy is strong enough the way it's written. And I went through all the documents that you guys provided. There's just not enough there. Please at least consider revising it and making it rock solid before you try and pass something like this. Thank you.
So I better get up here before they steal all my thunder, I guess. I'm Mike Cornea. I no longer have a kid in school. I guess I'm just a concerned citizen and general curmudgeon. So when I first started reading about this, and the way I look at things is, if somebody comes up with a new policy, it's usually a solution to a problem. This is a really drastic solution. Where's the problem? I haven't heard anybody getting shot in Wyoming. I have heard about people getting shot in Florida. And you know what? The people that were armed, the resource officer and the first 3 police, didn't go to the shooting. They walked away. They stayed back. Same thing in Columbine, the very first school shooting. Those armed officers stayed away. I don't see how arming anyone is going to help. Anyone. And then let's get this up front. I am not anti-gun at all. Even if I was, I don't know why that would invalidate my opinion, but I generally feel that I ought to be able to own anything that a police officer can carry. I'm pretty pro-gun. People should be able to have guns, but not in a public school, particularly with mandatory attendance. What you're basically saying is all you people that are anti-gun, don't want your kids around guns, tough. You've got to send them to this school. They've got to be around guns. So, in thinking about this, I thought there's sort of, kind of 2 truisms that occurred to me. One is, kids do really stupid things. They make mistakes. They're crazy. They don't think of consequences. It's just the way it is. The other was, what is being proposed is you want to give guns to people that are going to be surrounded basically by crazy people. Kids are crazy. They don't do the right thing, and you're going to have all these armed people. Don't know. So which adults are going to be armed? I too took the time to sit down and read the policy. I did a lot of, really? You guys kidding? First, there's no limit to the number of armed staff. It says maybe somebody's going to come up with one, but right now you could have every teacher, every janitor, every teacher's aide packing. That's what the policy is. And let's keep in mind due process here, folks. Your attorney can tell you about that. Who gets to carry, who doesn't? Once you say some people get to carry, there's going to be a lot of folks saying, if he gets to, I get to. It's a fundamental right. A fundamental right. So what are the qualifications to be able to carry? Well, you got to work for the district for 5 years. Well, no. Not really. If you want to carry and you haven't been here for 5 years, just go to the board, go to the superintendent and say, well, but I think I really ought to be able to. And they can make an exception. So there's not even that qualification. Not even a 5-year qualification. Criminal convictions. You gotta disclose those. But it doesn't disqualify you. I was amazed. You could have a conviction for aggravated assault and it does not disqualify you from carrying. It just says you gotta disclose it. So who's going to decide when about what convictions will disqualify somebody from packing? I hope somebody, sometime. Another requirement, and this was mentioned, a total of 24 hours of training initially for the first year. And 16 hours of that is I swear, basically how to get off a good shot. Not how to judge the situation or anything, just concealment, placing correctly. Nothing to do with the situation. 8 hours are. It covers 3 things. Lethal force guidelines. I don't know what it is. That's what it says. Some training in de-escalation. And I guess that means trying to talk the kid down, I guess. But I don't know. And then, safe and effective interaction with other armed staff and arriving law enforcement officers. That sounds like a good idea. 8 hours to cover all that. And then, it's a pass-fail. You take this class and then you're supposed to take a test to see if you're okay to be able to decide whether to kill the kid. You can take that test as many times as you want. You retrain and retest until you can get that gun. It seems like the default is give them the gun instead of, man, we don't know. So there is a psychological exam required. It doesn't say what it covers. It doesn't say what will disqualify. Nothing. It's just a psychological exam. For what? Well, I can think of one thing. Maybe if that psychological exam indicates that the person is a paranoid, like thinks ISIS wants to come kill his kids because it'd make him unhappy. Or if it's somebody that would. So, and like I said, I have guns. They're heavy. And there's a requirement they have to be concealed. So if it's somebody that would go through packing this thing, and you got to have it with you all the time if it's not in the box. And it's got to be concealed. So you got to pack this heavy thing around and wear an overgarment that'll conceal it. It's got to be hot. Got to be hot. So maybe if the psychological exam indicates this person wants to be a hero so bad that he would put up with that, maybe he ought not to be carrying. I don't know. So this all made me think of that, there's the old saying, people that want power are the absolute ones that shouldn't have it. And people thought Plato said that, but it's not true. Anyway, same thing with guns, maybe. People that want to carry guns are the ones that really shouldn't be carrying them. Maybe. So, was listening to the State of the State address, Governor Gordon, and he introduced principal from Gillette. His name's Terry Quinn. Talk about a hero. And maybe you guys heard about this, but Mr. Quinn's the principal of the Sage Valley, junior high up in Gillette. A couple of weeks ago, he got a report from another student that a kid had a gun. And so what did Mr. Quinn do? And by the way, this is the second time he's done it. He went and got another vice principal and said, put down your coffee, come with me. Went and found the kid and talked to him. And talked him into giving him his gun. Took the gun, took it back to the office, got the kid settled down, found out that there was another gun in the locker, went and got that gun, and then he called the police. Like I said, this is the second time this guy's done that, 10 years ago also. So here's thoughts from Mr. Quinn. My first thoughts is the safety of the students and everyone. He said, you just act. You're processing as you're moving forward toward the scene. I believe in relationships over bullets. And then has pointed out that a lot of people thought he should have called the police first. He said, if the police went in first, it could escalate the situation and somebody'd get hurt. He reasoned. So what we're looking at here is, say the kid comes to the principal and says, Johnny down here's got a gun. And of course this kid was bullied and all that, you know, typical. Anyway, Johnny's got a gun. So instead of the principal going down there and talking and putting people over bullets and relationships over bullets, they put out the call to the concealed carry corps. And I bet you there's some kind of little code that'll be developed too. And they go rushing in, and the kid's freaking out because he's stupid and he makes movements, and the bullets start to fly, and I am guaranteeing you a kid's gonna die. And who's responsible? Finally. Was it really? Time flies.
Hi, I'm Colleen Coons, and I'm a lifetime resident, and I'm a grandparent. I got this off of the internet. It's Violence Policy Center in Washington, D.C. Some of the statements they had were, armed guards confronted the Columbine killers, but could not stop them from carrying out their plan to massacre fellow students and then commit suicide. An armed school resource officer engaged Eric Harris in a gunfight, but was unable to stop Harris from entering the school. A county deputy also fired shots at Harris to no avail. In fact, highly trained police officers whose only job is law enforcement all too often fail to use firearms successfully. One study found that 21% of officers killed with a handgun were shot with their own service weapon. Trained law enforcement officials have only an average 20% hit ratio in armed confrontation. From 1990 to 1999, nearly 75% of police officers feloniously killed by suspects died within a 10-foot radius of the offender. It's known as the killing zone. Classrooms are small. This is some statistics from the Violence Policy Center. 300 guns used in the federally administered program to arm commercial airline pilots were lost in one 60-day period in 2004, according to the pilot organizations. Even federal law enforcement agencies have problems keeping track of firearms. The Department of Homeland Security reported 289 firearms as lost during fiscal year 2006 through 2008. Most losses occurred because officers did not properly secure firearms. Another serious threat is unintentional discharge. Many handguns, including popular models used by police departments, can fire when dropped or bumped. One errant bullet could kill a teacher, student, or innocent bystander. Focus should remain on preventing guns from getting into schools rather than relying on teachers and other professionals to prevail in a shootout. I also found an article written by Val Van Brocken. She carries herself. She conceal carries. And she's talking about she is this is her words. I got my teacher certification after student teaching in an elementary school. I also carry and have completed numerous tactical pistol trainings alongside law enforcement, which had as their stated objective to condition participants to respond instantly to any threat should prevail in any encounter. Then I was humbled by a firearms training simulator. I killed an undercover cop, 2 innocent bystanders to a bank robbery, and got myself repeatedly killed without saving anyone. An active shooter in a densely populated environment might not present a high-level skills task for a tactical expert. I question whether most lay people would agree. Add elevated heart rate, tunnel vision, and auditory exclusion, and even simple tasks become complex. I don't think teachers armed for the purpose of protecting students and staff can be equated with private citizens carrying. When I carry, I have no responsibility to protect others. I can choose to flee and leave others to danger. Nor does society expect me to have to take those risks. I can't imagine teachers armed for the purpose of protecting students and staff feeling that same freedom. We've seen the heroic sense of responsibility teachers have when they are unarmed. The recommendation to arm them is with the expectation they will protect others. Responsibility should be accompanied by qualifications and competencies. The greater the responsibility, the more qualifications and competencies needed. Because we trust our children to teachers doesn't mean we should trust teachers to protect them against armed assailants. We also trust our children to doctors and babysitters. We trust teachers to educate, in no small part because they generally must have a college degree with requisite hours of teaching methodology and subject content, successfully complete student teaching, and pass a certification exam. Just as the question of whether citizens should be permitted to possess firearms is not answered by one person's misuse of them, so too the question of whether arming teachers with no training or demonstrated competency is a good idea is not answered by one assistant principal holding an armed intruder at gunpoint until police arrived. I also don't think state laws that permit someone who has reached adulthood without a felony conviction to carry for personal protection set appropriate standards for arming teachers for the purpose of protecting students and staff against armed assailant. Fort Hood proved a mass shooting can occur on a secure military base. We shouldn't accept politicians saying we can't afford any training for our teachers who are willing to arm themselves to protect students and staff. Let us remind politicians we are the political reality. If we accept that teachers armed to protect students and staff should receive some training and demonstrate some safety and competency, then we open a Pandora's box of questions that must be answered. What training is adequate? Who will provide and pay for it? And the teacher's time and expenses. Who will assess mastery of the training and how? What if a teacher fails the assessment but wants multiple chances at the training? What about the workers' compensation claims for injuries during the training? What about the lawsuits for negligent training? I choose to have guns in my home knowing there is incontrovertible evidence that doing so makes it statistically many times more likely that there will be a death or injury to me, my family, or guests by one of those guns. I use the evidence to keep my guns as safe as possible. Accidental gun deaths show too many gun owners and their children don't abide by the 4 basic cardinal rules of gun safety. Numerous states permit gun ownership and carrying without knowing these rules. Parents and teachers should be educated on the evidence of significant increased risk of accidental gun injuries and death posed by guns carried by teachers who are not required to having any training or demonstrate even basic gun safety. This risk may be why SHOT Show and Crossroads of the West, 2 of the largest gun shows in the country, don't rely on state laws, but instead prohibit their Second Amendment enthusiasts from bringing any loaded firearms into the shows. That is because of safety concerns. It may also be why Utah educators have mixed reactions to guns in school. There's another reason we shouldn't task teachers with the armed protection of our schools. We already ask too much of them. In addition to educating, we expect them to maintain order, discipline, and nurture self-esteems. When I carry, I have a heightened vigilance. Without it, what's the point of carrying? Vigilance requires attention. So does teaching. Which task do we want attention taken from? Educating or protecting against an armed assailant? Bottom line, to the extent a community decides it needs armed protection in schools against heavily armed assailants, it shouldn't rely on teachers with no training or demonstrated competency to provide it. Thank you.
I'm Joyce Mander. I live in the district. I have 4 grandchildren who are in high school, middle school, and elementary school. And this is really important to a lot of the people in the community. I think I've heard that you don't feel you've had a lot of response from those of us who believe that this is not the answer. Guns in the school, arming the teachers are not the answer. But in reality, there are a lot of us out there. But there's a lot of people that aren't going to come forward. You have a lot of teachers that are out there. And I know they were given a survey, but they don't want to come forward. They are concerned about losing their jobs. I think we all recognize opposing what your bosses are suggesting isn't a good practice. And so it isn't unusual that you would find a survey that's really handpicked and the questions and that type of thing, that they're not going to be eager to come and answer the survey. And so I think that you're not hearing from them. A lot of people, like myself, are concerned because we have a lot of friends in the district, and we are in the minority, and it doesn't help your standing. It doesn't help what people think of you or how they relate to you if they know that you're really different than the general mix. And we know here, we could be against this policy and not be against the Second Amendment. I might repeat that when I read this, but I'm just trying to point out some things because I don't want to interrupt once I start reading. But I think the fact is that we're not necessarily against guns. And I didn't grow up here, so I didn't grow up with guns. I grew up in a single mom, and my sister and my father died when I was really little, and we did not have guns in the house. But I know here, I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the right to defend ourselves and our homes and our family. And I believe that that's important. But I don't go as far as to say that guns belong in schools. And I've read a fair amount of evidence and research that says this isn't. And I appreciate all of your statistics because they brought out, I've read a lot of the same statistics and the same, well, in the end, I'll share with you some other, I didn't go into detail like she did, but definitely the norm, the vast majority of evidence resource, and I'm going to ask you about what exactly research evidence that you all looked at to come to the conclusion that this was a good idea, because I simply could not find it. And I looked for it, and I simply didn't find it. Sure, the NRA puts it out, and I know that their board has a couple of individuals that are really gung-ho NRA. And, there are certain gun aspects that I don't approve of. The Second Amendment isn't one of them. I totally approve of that. I don't approve of the types of weapons that we are not regulating as much as we should. But that's where I stand. So with that, and I want to commend the board on what you've done so far. I feel good about the entrances to the schools and having to be buzzed in. And I think that is a good beginning. And I'm not saying quit there, but I am saying that there are a lot of other things that you can still do. And this is from the research I've done, and I guess that I just suggest that you look to that before you go all the way to having these poor teachers have to carry and putting them in these positions. So I begin with the assumption that we all are intent on finding the best solutions, providing the safest environment for our children, students, and teachers. Of course, the question is just what is the safest environment? According to the current school board's research, you have concluded, obviously, arming teachers is the best defense. Many of us obviously have different conclusions than this board. So we look to the situations and the two main givens. First, none of us can predict the future. None of us know what's going to happen in any one of these schools. And secondly, we all want what is best if something should happen and safest for our children and students. Therefore, we are all seeking a solution. We all know about these schools that have had these terrible, terrible incidents, and we don't want to have them here, and that's obviously a given, but it's scary. The best defense we have is looking and weighing the evidence. There's lots of evidence out there. We just have to look at it and weigh it. We have asked this board to give us what you have read and studied, but so far we haven't seen any of the real available evidence and reliable based sources that you say support the action of arming our teachers. Having no sources cited by the board and actually looking for legitimate, non-biased documentation, myself, I don't find that either. I mean, I actually went and looked and tried to look both sides, and I found very little that supported this. And I'll get to a few things in a minute. The preponderance of information states that not arming teachers is the safest. Again, if you have relative information, we'd really like to hear it because it'll make us feel a whole lot better. And I mean, we want to be all friends when this is said and done. And so we want to hear the good stuff. If you've got it, we want to hear it. In our community, having guns is a given, not just because of the Second Amendment, but because of the likelihood that people grew up with them. It's a norm. It would then stand to reason psychological issues with guns would be fewer. You'd think that in Wyoming, where everybody has guns, but a recent study indicated that states having the most gun ownership, Wyoming being right up there at the top of the list, have more gun-related homicides, accidents, and suicides per capita than any other state, or than other states. Obviously, our children are at risk. I know all of you believe that their safety is your prime objective, as do I. So, reason tells us to look at every shred of evidence and confirmation we can get our hands on, whether or not it says what we want, and depending on our personal agendas. As the trustees of our children, I believe you will do that. I believe you owe it to the parents of the community. And so I feel confident that you will make the right decision. Some of my, I cut out a lot of this stuff. 30 seconds. Excuse me? 30 seconds. That's it? Okay. I have some things here that I'll leave as if anybody wants to take a look at these. There's some really good stuff here. And I know in one survey, 11,000 teachers were, 3/4 were opposed to arming teachers, but 99 supported the presence of armed security. And there's so many other, I mean, you've looked at it. I know you know that there's other things to do. Okay. All right. And those are the bottom, there's just things that I had looked, researched, and. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicholas White. Couple new faces up here, just so the new members of the board know. Last year, I was part of the parent committee to kind of get this whole ball rolling. My daughter graduated last year. Well, yeah, last year, but I'm still my wife's still at the high school, so I'm here as a spouse. You know, I've been hit in town because I was part of this last year, and I've had all sorts of statistics thrown at me. It's been quite interesting to go back and look at them, because one of the big statistics as far as, you know, if it's actually the statistics on school shootings, on how rare they are. Well, if you actually look at the whole study, you'll find out they're even rarer because of what they all include. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I still believe in this policy. I think we need to push it through. We put a lot of time and effort in it last year to come up with training that's feasible, that gives people a chance to look at what liabilities there is of just owning a gun and carrying a gun in public. A lot of time was spent on what can be used as far as equipment, what is going to be safe. Ammunition requirements, you know, psych evals to make sure that there was competent people actually carrying. I don't know if it's already been brought up, but have you guys heard that Parkland, that school in Florida, has that already been brought up? Oh, Parkland's actually looking their big study as far as their school shooting that happened a couple of years ago, and they're actually looking and seeing that arming teachers might be a really good idea because entries didn't stop. Matter of fact, the shooter got out of the school and was off premises by the time they caught him. I appreciate you guys have been working on the entrances, but still, they're not where they need to be. I go visit my wife from time to time in the high school. I get ringed in. I walked in the main doors. I got two choices to make: the right and the wrong. So I hang a right and I go see Nicole. But there's nothing stopping me from going straight up the stairs and getting a tactical advantage if I wanted to. I appreciate you guys arming the teachers with batons and mace. That's not going to stop people. A gal I served with in basic training, they sent her through the gas chamber twice. She came out looking like she just had an allergy attack. It's something, but it's not good enough. Entries are going to be the number one thing to help out. Second thing that's going to help out is giving people a chance to protect themselves. I know it's not for everybody, but for those who want it, give them the opportunity to. I'd rather my wife have the option to protect herself and kids compared to just sitting there and being the first one to get shot because she's trying to do the right thing for kids. Sorry, I'm kind of scattered. Anyways. So I believe in the program. I wouldn't change a thing on it. If anything, I'd look harder at getting those entrances done. I mean, that's going to be the key thing to all of this. But giving people a chance to defend themselves.
Good evening. My name is Jenny White. I am a teacher at the high school. And I have listened to both sides of this story, and it's a complicated one, and it's a passionate one. But I do stand behind the policy, that the things that are put into it for training, for safety, that kind of thing, because I've been in that situation. And I apologize if I'm repeating myself for a few of you guys that have heard it. But a few years ago, we had at the high school a bomb threat and a shooter threat, and we didn't know if it was real or not. And I was in one of the interior classrooms, so no windows, And I was teaching, bless them, their little hearts. They were kids that had failed Algebra 1 the first semester, and so I got them for second semester to try and teach them all first semester and second all at the same time. It was fun. But these are the kids that were, wearing their hat backwards and sagging their pants down, and they were so tough and just convinced they, could rule the world. And when that got called and I had to close my door and lock it, seeing these kids' reaction was horrifying. It was so, to know that there was nothing I could do but hope somebody didn't come through that door. And if somebody did come through that door, despite the fact that I have a ton of training and am completely competent, all I could do was die first. And that feeling is something that I don't ever want to feel again. It was incredible. And so this is not asking to arm all teachers. It's not requiring that we arm all teachers. It's asking those who want to be able to. When you send your kids to school, you're asking me to take care of them, physically, emotionally, and I try and get a little bit of math in there too, because I think it's important anyways. But part of that is making them feel safe. One thing I thought was really interesting, so I do teach statistics, which has been really, keep using the word interesting. I love statistics, and they are important, and we absolutely should look at them, and I do agree with citing your sources and all of that good stuff. But one of the phenomenal thing about statistics and numbers, and it hurts me as a mathematician to say so, you can make them say whatever you'd like them to. If you want your numbers bigger, you change some of the parameters. Some of the studies include suicides near schools, include shootings near schools, and some are as wide around that as 5 miles. If we were to go 5 miles around our schools, that's everything. That's not a school shooting. So it's to get your statistics to say what you need them to. Of course, cite your sources and look at that. Another thing that I had happen this year that I thought was really interesting in my statistics class, we were sitting around and talking. We had finished our lesson, and this had come up that aren't teachers allowed to carry? And I said no, like that. It went through, but now it's not. So teachers aren't allowed to carry. And this young man was really taken aback. He was like, "Oh, I felt safer thinking you were carrying, and now that I know you're not, that makes me feel less safe." And I tried to get him to come today, but I guess he's got some meetings every Tuesday, so he isn't here. But I thought that was rather poignant and I know that some students feel the other way, but it is about the training, it is about the safety, it is about giving those of us who would like to the opportunity to try. I don't feel that by my superiors, that I have been pressured to say one way or the other. In fact, quite the opposite. There are some teachers that are very against this, absolutely. In fact, I've had a few threaten me, which is super awesome. And those teachers aren't with us anymore. Our teacher is not with us anymore. But I did want to say that we don't all feel that way, and I do appreciate you guys putting your time and effort into this, and entrusting us with your kids. I do enjoy my job very, very much, and like I said, try and get a little math in there, but keeping them safe is important too. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Scott Robinson. I am a resident of the district and employed by UNA County School District Number 1. Teach at the high school. Couple things. I agree totally with Ms. White about statistics. The good doctor last week that got up and quoted statistics that we had 500 million children in American schools. Well, I teach that the population of America is only 320 million. And there's a vast difference between that and 500 million. Statistics can tell you anything you want. On this subject here, I think the most important statistic I can think of is there is only one state in the United States that has not had a school shooting. That is not Wyoming. As our neighbor to the south, Utah, they have a very good policy. Teachers are very comfortable with it, and it functions. And you can quote also the statistics you want, but 0 school shootings is the bottom line. They say it can never happen here. I wish they'd have been with me last summer. Last summer I was teaching summer school at the high school, and we had a lockdown. At the courthouse, a convicted felon had wrestled a gun away from an armed guard, forced his way outside, commandeered a car in the middle of the street, and was loose in the community. And this was being texted over the phones that the kids have. We went into lockdown. I got followed the procedure, put the kids back in the corner, secured the doors, turned the lights out, and I sat there and I thought, well, what if he comes here? And all I had left was my college wrestling skills, which would have been used if it had to. But there is a better way. Rather than hiding in a corner, waiting for somebody to come through the door, a teacher can be prepared, if properly trained, to defend those students. I heard one man talk about they just walked away at Parkland. I do not have the ability to walk away. You need to know that. I'm in that room with those kids, and if that day comes, and I pray it never does, I will defend them with everything I have, including my training. And you need to know that. I know this is a very emotional issue, and yes, I've had critical staff threaten me. And thankfully, some of them are no longer at the school. And I believe that this country was founded on greatness. And part of that greatness was refusing to be a victim. I think you've done a wonderful job bringing this policy and being well informed and making good decisions, and you put a lot of time, effort, and money into this thing, as well have others. And I hear people stand up and talk about the training. I hear them talk about belittle and make light of the psychological examination. By the way, folks, it's the exact same psychological examination our police officers take. I know because I've been through it twice now. Okay, so you hear a lot of people spout about things they don't know about. I'm asking you to stay the course, follow your heart, and do the right thing. Thank you.
I'm Bill Housley. I'm a district resident, and I have a son in the high school. As a parent, and most of this is prepared because if I don't use, it's kind of an emotional topic for me. If I don't use a prepared statement, I might not get through it. I appreciate this board and your courage in addressing such a polarizing issue. That couldn't have been easy. As a parent of a child attending Evanston High School, I support the new rule allowing trained and appropriately vetted staff to choose to carry concealed firearms, following appropriate safety guidelines that manage the risks. Resource officers have not proven to be an absolute deterrent when looking at the overall picture. Access controls have not proven to be an absolute deterrent or preventive measure. I would not support any measure that would allow anyone except the resource officer to open carry, nor do I support any measure that informs the public as to which staff members are permitted to conceal carry. I think that visible firearms intimidate, spread fear, and are inconsistent with the atmosphere of safety that needs to prevail in America's schools. Statistics cannot measure the deterrent impact on a potential perpetrator planning an attack and selecting targets, not knowing from who or where or when an armed response might come. This uncertainty is leveraged every day by the airline industry as they permit sky marshals and some others to carry firearms hidden on their persons onto airlines. Concealed weapons carried by trained and responsible individuals is therein demonstrated by the professionals to be a valuable deterrent and therefore a valid consideration here. In fact, even the media coverage of these discussions we're having has in an admittedly unmeasurable way the likelihood of certain kinds of threat sources never targeting Evanston schools. Gun safety statistics cited from the Centers for Disease Control by some, and a lot of these statistics you've been hearing about gun safety come directly from those statistics, are too all-inclusive to be helpful to specific controlled circumstances such as this. They might, however, identify some risks that can be addressed in the details and training, such as the handling of firearms on school property. All of this aside, something has happened to our culture. Guns are inanimate objects, and changes in their availability, and changes in their availability in the U.S. through the years do not correlate to the increased danger to our schools and other gathering places that has been recently demonstrated. Where have we come as a people that we even have to have this discussion? How can a locally elected body such as this one address the reckless hate and insensitivity to the value of life that seems to motivate people these days to act with such violence against the most innocent among us? Schools are not to blame, of course, but they might have a role to play in the quest for a brighter future. This is where children get their start at learning to interact with others as adults. Perhaps we can find additional ways for our schools to help in fostering humanity in young minds and maybe help turn this terrible new trend. Someday humanity will achieve world peace, and I don't think they'll achieve it with firearms. But with the blood of the Savior. In the meantime, we can have peace in our hearts, and yes, some of us, a thumb on safety. Thank you.
Thank all of you for taking the time and being so considerate and paying so much attention here tonight and former nights. My name is Paul Barnard. When I was in the Senate a few weeks ago, or a few years ago, this is one of the bills that took about 3 years to get through the Senate. And it took a lot of time, it took a lot of thought. And I'm here to tell you tonight that I think that it's a worthy program, and I think that it can be instigated step by step, person by person, and I think it can be a program that I think it will deter somebody from coming in here who's thinking about harming our children, knowing that someone in this school can fight back. I think we need to look at the state of Utah. As my term as a senator, I had many meetings with Utah legislators, I always ask them, what kind of problems have you had with your gun policy in your schools? Always the answer was none. There might have been small things, but any kind of big things like that just didn't happen. There's other states like Oklahoma and Texas that have these things, and I haven't heard of any instances where the teachers have gotten out of control. I don't think we can man resource officers in each school. I think by my calculations, that paying a resource officer $30,000 a year, your council here would have to probably come up with $250,000 to $300,000 to protect their schools. I don't think they're a possibility, but I don't think they're the answer. Most school gun incidents are over in 6 to 10 minutes. By the time the police come, most of the time the damage has been done, and that person has either self-inflicted himself with a suicide, or they've taken off. So the only kind of person that's going to really make a difference, in my mind, is a teacher who is prepared to fight back. I don't envision teachers walking around with a holster or with a concealed, with a coat with a gun underneath it, or walking around with a gun in their purses. The bill that I worked on and I passed in the Senate is where the teachers would be interviewed first of all by the principals and 2 members of the school board. They would be okay. They take a psychological test. They take a personal background test. They go through all that testing, and then they would be able to have a meeting with the administrators. And like has been stated, if this is done right, nobody in the school will know who has a gun, because those teachers that choose to carry will have their firearms in a cabinet, locked, and then they have to have when the cabinet's unlocked, they put their hand on a biometric lockbox. Nobody else can open that except them. So the students aren't going to have the guns. Students aren't going to know which teachers have the guns. I think that's one of the things that needs to be thought about. Training is a must. Anybody who enters into this program should willingly and pay for out of their own pocket anywhere from 20 to 40 hours of training. As far as I know, our police department would be willing to help with this, and our county sheriff's department would be willing to help with this. But it would be done at their own expense. To me, I think, as I said before, if you take a step-by-step approach, do it in a way that's private, and have training and have regular meetings with the police once a year, working with the teachers, learning about the crisis shooting, so that our local law enforcement people know about who is carrying. I think this thing can be a workable thing. To me, it comes down to a personal liberty. If I'm a teacher and I've jumped through all the hoops, I've taken all the things, I've taken all the tests, I've proved myself, I've been trained, why do I have to stay in a room if there's a shooting and not be able to defend myself and not be able to defend my students? I think it's a personal liberty we're talking about. No program's going to be perfect. There might be something that goes wrong. If it goes wrong, you have the power to stop it. If it doesn't work, if it creates too much of a chaos or bad feelings in the schools, then you can just say, we have a meeting and say we stop it. So it's not something that you can't retreat from. So again, I'm in favor of this if it's done right, if it's done deliberately, if it's done in secret, if it's done in a way that the teachers aren't running around the halls shooting things. That is That is chaos. So thank you for your time. Appreciate your help.
Hi, I'm Nina Germany Greer. I reside within the district. I also work at the high school. I'm a speech language pathologist and have been one for 35 years, the majority of which I've served here in this school district. I come to you today to talk to you about the number of people that are standing behind me, hi Jamie, that aren't here. And those are the teachers who are too afraid to come and talk to you about their concerns about the use of this policy being passed and teachers being able to have concealed weapons. I'm very disturbed that there's such a difference and dissonance between educators in our buildings over this. It really bothers me that we have a lot of discord when we come to this topic. It separates us, it divides us, it doesn't provide any way, shape, or form towards continuing to pursue excellence in our educational opportunities for our students. There are a number of teachers who are very concerned and yet have various reasons why they can't come and talk, most of which I found personally very disturbing. So I will just give you my impressions as I can, as I'm not a very good public speaker. I do better one-on-one, but I'll try my best to sound sophisticated and smart, but mostly it's just my thoughts. Teachers are not trained law enforcement officers, nor are they employed to be protection officers, combat officers, or serve as service people in that sense of defensive line of duty. Those of you who do not know me do not know that I lived with a dad who spent 35 years in the United States Air Force as an armament instructor. Weapons are by no way, shape, or form unfamiliar to me. My dad, for almost 8 years, was the top marksman in the United States Air Force and was a competitive shooter. I grew up pulling clay pigeons on the fields for my dad and have been raised with a very healthy appreciation of weapons. That appreciation extends to one policy and one overriding thought. You pick up the weapon, you intend to use it. You intend to use it to kill what you are pointing at. That being said, we all understand that principle. We live and breathe in Wyoming. Okay, that's a huge decision to make. It is a personal liberty and justice that we have. It's attributed to all the things that are good in the United States of America, most of which boils down to the consideration of democracy. We should have a choice. Democracy to me is two sides that don't agree, agreeing to find places in the middle where they do agree. That's a very difficult concept to apply to this situation. Very difficult. So in that, I say to you, what are the consideration of the rights of students and parents who do not wish to have their children in rooms where guns are present? Yes, I understand the policy, and I've seen the boxes. I understand everything that's written. But again, I say to you, where are their civil liberties and their rights? Those of us who do not wish to be protected in such a scenario with weapons. Emergencies happen. Things happen out of context. That's what you train for. That's what you learn to do. You develop muscle memory in terms of emergencies. Teachers are not police officers. They do not have that kind of training. They go through the criterion that we've set in place, and it's all very good criterion. But they do not have that kind of muscle memory or level of experience. I question the intended use of a concealed carry permit if the weapon is to be in a box. A concealed carry permit means you carry it. If you carry it, then it is upon your body. And I would like to say that, let me just say something first. The hundreds of thousands of dollars that we spend on the electrical safety systems in our buildings are excellent. I really do feel that way. I feel like the systems that have been put in place to protect us are a really good investment. Very pleased about that. The use of the box as a bio box to carry a weapon, to have that weapon in that box, is what I question. And the reason I question it is not that I don't think that we should be able to use items in the box for defense. I do. I just don't think it should be a weapon. There is a consideration of concealed carry that was even discussed by the Wyoming Department of Ed in this particular non-regulatory guidance issue, September 2017. I trust that you all have seen it and read it thoroughly. And it says that the concealed biometric container must be in direct control of the employee at all times. And that implies that the employee should never leave that box alone. Yes, it is biometrically capable of being opened, but where there's a will, there's a way. Additionally, placing the firearm in or removing it from the container requires an additional manipulation of a weapon. Now, it would seem to me to be reasonable that the only reason you're getting it out is because there's chaos and emergency and crazy things happening in your room at that time, in the building at that time. Yes, we have the measures by which we know what we're supposed to do, but you are taking that weapon out of that box during the moment of crisis. That concerns me. And this is the one thing I wanted to tell you. This is a personal experience for me. So I go into a lunchroom to fill up my water container while the teachers are having lunch. And there's a conversation going on. This was at the very beginning of all of this. In between before we knew how the boxes were going to be instigated, but after the conversations had started at the school board evening meetings. And one of the teachers turns to another teacher whom has been very vocal and outspoken about carrying a weapon, carrying it concealed. A person whom I have great integrity and value in, and still do. At the end of this story, I want you to remember, I still really value this educator very much. The other teacher says to this teacher, whom I value very much, well, what would happen if you have that concealed on you and a student in your classroom or otherwise comes into the room and they are stoned, they're high, they're psychologically disturbed, they've had a really bad experience, they're upset, they come to you, that weapon is on you, and for some reason you begin to feel threatened in one way or another. The kid comes after your weapon, or the kid is acting crazy and you have the weapon on you and the kid comes too close to you. You get the drift of what the teacher was saying. I can't do it word for word. I can't remember exactly the words. What would you do? Would you shoot that student? And this teacher said, and rightfully so, said, yes, I would. She's right. She would have to do that. We've introduced into the perimeter of safety in a classroom a situation that completely eliminates the opportunity to give that kid counseling, to take that kid out in the hall, to protect that kid from himself or from whatever his environment or experiences are causing him such great distress and disturbance. That's a concern for me. So then my students or my son is in the room when this happens. Who then provides the opportunity for my kid to have recourse to get through that? He didn't sign up for that outfit. That's not the cattle drive I put him on to get educated to have a high school diploma. Yes, I know that we all have unavoidable accidents. I know that things happen in a matter of moments and we have to make life decisions. But again, I would say that's not the way it should be. We are educators. I want you to take care of my boy. I want you to make policy where my son is protected, where all the children I've worked with for 35 years are protected. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I really do.
Madam Chairperson, members of the board, Superintendent Ryan, my name is Tim Bepler and I reside within the boundaries of the district. On January 4th, 2019, I submitted a written statement along with a number of attachments containing extensive research that supports a rejection of the proposed rule. Also submitted at that time was written testimony of Kelly Drain, the research manager at the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, presenting additional research showing the adoption of Rule CKA would substantially increase the chance of violence in the school district, and that this increased risk outweighed the potential protective effect of the rule's adoption. You also received a submittal from Mark Jones, an individual with over 30 years of experience as a member of law enforcement, the State Department Diplomatic Security Service, and the ATF, setting forth his research and expert opinion that arming school personnel would pose a greater risk than the problem it seeks to address. My colleague Monica Vozakis submitted her oral testimony last week. In addition to a written submittal supported by extensive research related to the dangers of arming district personnel and establishing the lack of evidence that this approach would make our children safer. Last week, you heard from 2 local pediatricians who drove those same points home. It's my understanding that all of this research has been provided to you, and I assume that you have taken or will take the time to read this documentation. So I will not repeat all the arguments made or restate the research provided again tonight. Rather, I would just like to talk to you briefly about my thoughts in general about the proposal to introduce guns in the schools. You've heard from various individuals who believe that you're simply going through the motions to make Rule CKA official, and that it doesn't matter what they are submitting written or oral comments in opposition to the rule. I hope and believe that's not the case. When you first adopted policy CKA in March 2018, the members of the board at that time may not have realized that they were dealing with fundamental rights of parents, teachers, and students. They may have thought they were just implementing a board policy, just like the myriad of policies this board addresses over the course of a year. Judge James, in striking down policy CKA, made it clear that the introduction of guns in our schools implicates those fundamental rights in such a way that does not allow you to treat this subject matter as if it were just another policy. You have heard parents tell you that they believe they have a fundamental right not to have their children exposed to the presence of guns in their schools. By failing to even consider an accommodation to those parents, you are denying those parents and their children fundamental rights. Any suggestions that teacher or staff who speak out against the rule or indicate that they won't apply to concealed carry under the rule may be in violation of the confidentiality provisions contained in the rule and may subject the teacher or staff to discipline is and will be a denial of those teachers' fundamental rights. The written submittal you received from Attorney Sharon Rose further discusses these and other constitutional issues related to your consideration of Rule CKA. Over 10 years ago, Justice Scalia, in writing for the majority of the United States Supreme Court decision in Heller, which struck down a District of Columbia ban on the possession of handguns, said, and I quote, "Nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and public buildings," unquote. Why are schools sensitive places where guns can, and I would add should, be forbidden? Schools are special places where children learn the basic academic and social skills that are needed to function in society. Schools are also gathering places for our community, providing resources that may not be available anywhere else. They are essential to the realization of our core values of education. Yes, schools need to be safe environments so that children have a good atmosphere within which to learn. But they should also be a refuge from the gun violence that now touches so many Americans. You've heard from parents that want to know that when they drop their children off at school, that they're safe. And that's exactly how they should feel. But what these parents fail to realize is that there's no evidence that arming school personnel will make their children safe. In fact, the opposite is true. The overwhelming evidence on this subject is that the arming of school personnel makes our schools less safe. Under the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act, if you adopt substantive rules that impact fundamental rights, then you must have a rational basis for doing so, or your decision may be overturned by the courts as being arbitrary and capricious. Whether to adopt Rule CKA should not be a decision based on slogans like "good guys with guns," or gun-free zones, or unarmed victim zones. It should be a decision that is based on the best available research and evidence as to what will make our school children safe in these times of gun violence. Whether to adopt Rule CKA should not be based on which side of this issue presents the most comments to this board. It should be based on the substance of those comments. Based on the record of written and oral comments now before you, I would submit that a decision to adopt Rule CKA would not have a rational basis that is sustainable in the courts. Thank you for listening.
Good evening. Sorry, my name is Jamie Jorgensen. I am a parent and also an employee of the UNA County School District. I know you guys have already heard me speak once before. Some of you, this is third time's the charm. I am coming up to speak in favor of this policy. I have given you guys some of my statistics that I had found on the internet based off of what I had searched. And also a statement that I'm going to read tonight. We have started putting other safety measures in place. We have hotlines for our schools that not only have helped stop violence in our schools last year alone, but we also helped current students when dealing with problems in and out of their school.
We run through different drills at school and talk to students about what to do if an active shooter or threat comes into our school. This is another means to adding safety and protection into our schools. Today, for instance, we had a lockdown drill. I was in one of the offices with another student and had no means of protecting that student because there is no safety box in that office, not even one that you put your finger on to start the alert. That is why we need this policy, so we can protect our students from that mean of deadly harm. I don't think that some of the individuals in our community that are against the policy realize that not just anyone can get the option to carry. There is a long and extensive process that every applicant has to go through. This is also a voluntary process. The school district is not saying, you have to go do it. You have to go do it. It is strictly voluntary. You first need to apply, which can be limited by the board of how many applications they decide to take. They could take only 1 per year. They could take 5 per year. Employment of 5 years and in good standing for those past 5 years. I've only reached 4. I'm not applicable. And the individual has a valid concealed carry permit. Once all of those requirements are met and board approved, they go through 16 hours of live fire handgun training and 8 hours of non-lethal scenario training, which also has to be approved by the superintendent and local law enforcement of that program. Your training doesn't end there. The individual must complete annual trainings of no less than 12 hours of handgun training with live fire and scenarios, which must be completed before each school year even starts for you to continue to have that concealed carry. Excuse me. You also have to fully participate in school safety and security programs for a period of at least 12 months. I already know who our safety instructor is. I would gladly get with him. And in fact, during the scenario today, I sent him an email of the situation that I encountered during our lockdown. Once all of that is complete and the board deems you still fit to continue, you have to do a psychological exam. I've also had to do that. I had to do it when I was in the military. I had to do it when I worked dispatch at the sheriff's office. It is a grueling process, and they ask you a lot of weird questions. Along with random drug and alcohol testing. When I took the training to get my concealed carry, one thing we learned was if you see your weapon, you are in violation of your permit. That is another reason why it is confidential, and you will not know who has it because it is a concealed carry. I brought with me 4 articles on statistics, which I know we're all so excited to hear about statistics, on mass shootings and what the FBI counts as a mass shooting. The FBI only reports on when there are 4 or more victims, not including the shooter. They do not report when there is less than 3. The most recent FBI report, between 2000 and 2017, there were 250 incidences. 2,217 of those combined with either killed or injured total, which when divided over a 17-year period is 130 either killed or injured every year for an active shooter and only 14.7 incidences a year, which during that time, that's amazing. They're low. On the other statistics I brought are current from 2018 that involve school shootings. One report for Education Week had 24 school shootings or school event shootings. 21 of those were not reported by the FBI due to not meeting their standards of mass shootings. 3 of those only involved adults. PBC News posted an article, 2008, worst year for U.S. school shootings. They mentioned Education Week in the article, stating, Education Week tracked shootings that took place on school property during school time and there was a victim other than the perpetrator. And I go back to Ms. White's comment. It depends on the statistic, how much information you're actually gathering. This is very limited. However, they also reported on Center for Homeland Defense and Security Measures school shootings differentiated by tracking gun incidences in school regardless of time or who was injured. By widening the measure of incidences in a school, it came to a record of 94 school shooting incidences across the U.S. in 2018 alone. On average, there are 180 school days every year. That means that last year alone, there was an average of 1.9 school-involved shootings per week. The previous highest record was 59 in 2006, where the other report that I brought from CNN, where the article states 23 school shootings in 21 weeks. That was from January 2018 to May 2018. Now, I understand that some of these statistics that I brought are going to contradict each other, and again, it depends on where you get your information, how much background you do on that, how are they tracking their information. I also looked to see what the top leading causes of death were. Not one of those implemented accidental shootings. The closest one was suicide. I'm not saying that gun violence is not a problem in our country. What I'm saying is state all the facts. I also looked up how many deaths by firearms. This is what I found. From Gun Violence Archive, which is a nonprofit corporation formed in 2013 to provide free online public access to accurate information about gun-related violence in the U.S. The total number of deaths last year in 2018 were 14,647. I also looked up how many deaths are caused by medical malpractice each year. And it was reported by the Johns Hopkins Hospital that they estimated that medical errors result in 250,000 deaths each year. So I figured that was kind of interesting with what the pediatrics had come to tell us last week. Just recently this year, it was also touched on about the lockdown that we had at the county courthouse. It is inevitable. Things are going to happen. We're not closed off from the rest of the world. Also, this last fall, I had some of the students I work with ask me if I really would put my life on the line for them. Without missing a beat, I said yes. Surprisingly, some of them did not believe me. That is sad that our students don't think that we as educators would do everything in our power to keep them safe. I also spoke with some other staff members and told them what we had talked about, and they also had said if it means their life versus 30 lives or 5 lives, I would choose the lesser. I wanted to also add in here that based off of what the gentleman before me was saying on some information that I also got, myths versus facts. When a concealed carry weapon will lead to mass public shootings, that is a myth. Fact, multiple victim public shootings drop in states that pass shall issue CCW legislation. CCW holders have prevented or curtailed mass public shootings. Pearl Junior High School, Pearl, Mississippi. Parker Middle School, Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. Players Bar and Grill, Winnemucca, Nevada. And New Life Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Also, at the sheriff leading the Florida Commission investigation, the Parkland massacre, said he believed that trained volunteer teachers should have access to guns as a last line of defense in a school shooting. And earlier this fall, U.S. Secretary of Education, and I apologize if I get her last name wrong, Betsy DeVos, made it clear that she believes districts have the flexibility to use federal funds to arm teachers. It's also said here that she is a leader of the Federal School Safety Commission. If she is saying that it is right that we do this, then I believe that she should, and that we should do this. Thank you.
My name is Carl Allred. I live here in the district. My kids all went to the schools here, and they all graduated, and I've got some more kids that'll be probably coming to the schools here. I spoke last week, you heard me, and sorry I was late here tonight, but I was listening as I was driving home from work to some of the people that were speaking to you earlier. You know, I mean, I go on all night about different stories about things that have happened here. Some of the things that you've heard from people who are against this policy, I heard one person mention the Fort Hood shooting and talking about that being a secured facility. Well, as a veteran, I can tell you there's something you may not know about Army bases here in the U.S. You're not allowed to carry a gun there. As an ex-MP, you know, we watched some of the gates. Fort Hood, in a previous job, was a customer of mine. And I pulled up there one day. We were installing a bunch of computers there. And I realized as I got there, of course, I'm in Texas, far away from home, and all I've got is my truck that I'm traveling through. I wasn't staying in a hotel that night. We were going to work, and so my 45 was in my truck. I figured, oh man, what if they find it? Well, as they searched the truck and they tore everything apart, they never found it. And I went on the base. But when you're on a base and an Army base here in the U.S., if you live on base, you're not allowed to have a firearm in your house, in your housing. They have to be locked up in the armory. If you're a soldier there, you don't get to have a firearm unless you're going out to the range. And then they're locked up in the armory where you don't have access to it. So it's a perfect place for somebody to go in and shoot it up. You know, I've had times where I've been shot at, and I've had to return fire on people, and it's a terrible feeling. But what's even a worse feeling is when the shots ring out and you don't have your firearm there. Now we're talking about having kids in a schoolroom. There. Do we have some bad kids at school? Most of the school things are done by kids that go there. We have some bad ones here. I remember when my daughter was going to the high school here, there was a young man who asked her out to take her to a dance. And she was going to go with him until he was on the football game. And after the game that night, we were walking across the field, and I was sitting there watching him openly fondle another young lady right there on the football field. And my daughter asked me to take care of that. So I went over and had a little chat with him. Told him that he would never speak to my daughter again, and he would never go out with her. Well, last year, that young man killed a young lady down in Salt Lake. And afterwards, I found out that he had sexually assaulted several young women at our high school. So we do have some bad people here. But when something happens and those kids are in a classroom, if somebody's shooting in the school, you're not going to stop them by locking the doors. You're not going to stop them by turning out the lights and everybody huddling in a corner. A classroom's kind of a decent place because you got a door coming in, and if you have something to stop them, a firearm, you can sit back there in the dark, and when they come through the door, then you can take care of the problem and protect those kids. You know, you've heard some people say, well, their kids may not feel safe because they know there's guns in the school. Well, I'll tell you what, if you've ever been in an active shooting, when those bullets are flying, everybody goes to the guy who's got a gun there to protect them, whether it's a police officer, a security guard, or a private citizen who has one. And they sure feel a lot safer getting behind you when you've got the gun. You know, I was mentioned about the judge that ruled against the school district this last time. Personally, she should have recused herself. She had a personal incident with a family member who committed suicide with a gun, and she doesn't like guns. So there's a lot of reasons why people have their opinions. But when the facts come down, there's no better way to protect yourself when bullets are flying than to have something throwing books at them, locking the doors. That's not going to do it. Somebody wants to come to the school, first off, you let the students in the school. That's where they're supposed to be. And that's usually the ones who are doing some of this. People say, well, we'll rely on the police officers. Remember, the police officers were hiding behind cars down in Florida while kids were getting killed. Columbine, one of the biggest ones that everybody likes to point to, the police officers stood outside the school while kids died. The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled police officers have no legal responsibility to protect you. Now, our police department, we got some pretty good cops here, and they're going to come in. I know they will. And I have a lot of faith in them. But legally, they don't have a responsibility to protect you. You have to protect yourself. And all I'm asking is give those who want to the tools to protect our kids. Nobody's forcing anybody. These are all well-trained. They're going to be well-trained by the time they go through this. And nobody's asking them to go hunt down a shooter. They're going to protect the kids in the classroom. And again, like I said last week, all these people who are against that, are they the one who's going to go tell a parent that their kid is dead because we did not give them the tools to protect our kids? Thank you.
Board, thank you. Third time, Bob Jorgensen, 3 kids in the district, wife, high school. So a lot of us parents are coming up here with emotion because we feel so greatly about this in defense. We spent a lot of time gathering the research we provided you today. A lot of that came off of a website called gunfactinfo.com. If you're ever curious about it, it's a nonprofit group. It doesn't support anti-gun or pro-gun. It's all fact. Take a look at it. You'd be surprised some of the stuff you can find on there if you do a little bit more research and dig a little bit harder and want to see something. Statistics, there we go again, right? Awesome numbers. So I'm not going to take 10 minutes. I'm just going to say I'm so for this support. I hope, like last year, when the when the little hotline had the kid that threatened to bring a gun to the school, got stopped before it ever happened. Perfect. I was in Florida, same time that the shooting happened. Like, what the heck's going to happen now? It's like, so I leave in March, and hopefully nothing like this happens in the summertime. We have, all these scenarios are overwhelming. We live on I-80. We have the state hospital that is within jogging distance to any of our schools. Closest one is, either Aspen or UME, you pick. Mental stability is the biggest case to have, an active shooter in a place. They're not mentally stable. Well, we put a big old building over there with lots of those little unstable people over there. We have I-80 that comes through here and he wants to stop it. Guy just escaped from Utah. Luckily they caught him, who was doing the workforce stuff. Probably saw it on the news today. He was in one of their police vehicles, but they got him. What was to stop him coming all the way to an 80? Come this way. Nothing. So my fear is the kid that is bullied, the fear that the unstable kid that just wants to hurt somebody because that's going to make him feel better is, that's something I can't control. The gentleman said about, kids are crazy, and that is very true. How are you going to stop them? You're going to shoot them if they come in there high and they're all doped up, everything with that? I hope they wouldn't, because they'd be able to de-escalate that because they go through all this training already. So we talked, you got to have 24 hours of training. I'm all for, if you want to, rewrite that this whole amendment agreement thing, have more training. I'm so for training. Training will make you better. If I would have had training, the guy never would have broken into my house. I would have shot him right there on my doorstep, but he did. Unfortunate. Training, I'll be going to it. So I am ready for when this happens again, if it ever does. I hope it never does. But I am so in for this, and, it's like I said, statistics, we gave you some numbers. You guys are in a tough position, but I hope you guys can come through with this. Thanks.
My name's Doug Rigby. I work for the school district. And I want everyone to know that I respect their opinions. I truly do. Whether you're for or against the policy, I respect their opinions, and I certainly hope those will respect mine. And what I want to do is express my support for the policy for two reasons. One, I believe it's right to provide an opportunity for those who wish to do this, the opportunity to arm themselves, to protect themselves and students in our schools. Are there scary aspects of that? Absolutely. That's why the training component is so important, and I feel very strongly about that. Jenny explained a scenario. I happened to be a principal with Mr. Lester during one of those situations. Our district went into lockdown. My wife's in her school. All she knows is Evanston High School is in lockdown, and I sent her a text that said, I'm on my way there. We have people in our district that will do whatever it takes to save children's lives. One of the things that I've done in my parent advisory meeting, we did it just as an exercise. I wasn't trying to convince anybody of anything. But I tapped my finger. I had one person go through, and the scenario where you're calling 911 and the information that's needed from a 911 operator to be able to dispatch officers to a school to the right place. And it takes longer than you think. Our teachers under this policy would be expected to stay in classrooms and only defend students in their classrooms if that door was breached. I'm in support of the policy because of those areas that are common areas, our lunchrooms. Evanston High School before school, when there's hundreds of kids in the common area. Heaven forbid a shooter would enter that area. The amount of casualties that would take place is astounding and could be mitigated if you had someone there to maybe stop that shooter. The second reason that I'm in favor of the policy is, and I know that others will disagree with this, there are two bills. There's the Senate File 75 and House Bill 183 that are currently in legislation that would repeal the gun-free zones. And that would allow anyone with a concealed carry permit to carry firearms in any of our schools at any time. I'm in favor of this policy because I believe that the training requirements and the stipulations that are in place provide protections that keep us safer. Certainly more safe than a free-for-all repeal of the gun-free zone. I'm in favor of the training. I'm in favor of providing opportunities for those who wish to take that added responsibility. And it is a significant amount of responsibility to take on. And nobody should do it lightly. Thank you.
I'll wait until the end, always. Madam Chair, members of the board, Sheila McGuire. I am a parent, concerned citizen, president of the state PTA. So thank you for taking the time to listen. So some of the stuff I've heard attending all of these meetings and all of these forums, we have to protect kids from these threats, right? So we heard last week the odds of being killed in a school shooting are 1 in 614 million. I know something about statistics too, believe it or not. That does not mean there are 614 million students in our school system in the United States, which is impossible when there are only 300 million people in the country. It means that when you compound how many students are in school each day and the number of days that go between school shootings, the risk is 1 in 614 million. This is less than the risk of using a vehicle to get to and from school every day, less than the risk of contracting a potentially fatal illness such as the flu while you're at school, and less than the risk of suffering a life-threatening injury while playing school sports. These are all based on a Department of Education study that was reported in the Washington Post in late 2018.
I have heard the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I've heard that one a lot. Trained police officers are accurate only about 30% of the time when discharging a weapon in high-stress situations. This is a statistic from the FBI. People are going to come into our schools off of I-80 or from terrorist groups to shoot up our schools, and shooters are cowards who target gun-free zones, right? Except 95% of these shooters in school are students who are in there anyway, many of whom report feeling bullied, rejected, or persecuted by someone at that school, and that is why they are targeting that school. It has nothing to do with it being a gun-free zone. It has to do with that's where they feel they were hurt. Nobody in their right mind will shoot up a school if they know teachers are armed. Who in their right mind shoots anybody? That just doesn't even make any sense. 78% of student shooters have a history of suicide attempts or had suicidal thoughts prior to the attack. Many of them expect to die while they are doing this. These statistics are from Campus Safety magazine. So, these are all examples of stuff I have heard throughout all of these meetings. You'll notice that the majority of the comments of people opposed to this are actually based on statistics and facts and peer-reviewed studies, empirical evidence. Yes, statistics can be tweaked to show lots of different things. Again, I know something about statistics. However, I have yet to hear anybody in favor of this actually produce statistics about how many school shootings have been stopped by somebody armed. It's because you can't find any of them. There are no statistics on that I have seen anywhere, and I have looked hard. The district is committed to high reliability schools, which includes a stated focus on data-driven decision-making. That has to apply to this situation as well. Data-driven decision-making. I've asked repeatedly for anybody on this board or with the district to show me the data, and I have never seen it, not any of it. So, I'm one of those people who happens to feel that all of these public comments are in vain because most of you have already made up your mind and you are going to vote for this rule no matter what. That's what I think. I think that you're going to decide that you know better what is best for my kid, and you don't. I think that you're going to decide that you know better what's going to keep my child safe. And I think that my strongly held beliefs and convictions about how I choose to raise my children away from firearms for reasons that are quite frankly nobody's business but mine, they're my kids, you're going to say that I have no right to ask for my children not to be around firearms at school because doing so would be an inconvenience for the district. That's what I think. So, last year, when this was originally being discussed, I heard some of you on this board say that this was just one part of a comprehensive safety and security plan, a plan that would also include a focus on school counseling and social and emotional well-being. Since that one statement last year, I have heard nothing else from anybody on this board about any programs or plans to implement social and emotional well-being focus at any of our schools. You haven't proposed anything that would do that. There's no discussion about the need for more school psychologists, counselors, about anti-bullying programs, about the many students we have that may be considering suicide, which is a risk factor for shooting up a school. Student-to-student threats, I haven't heard anything about that. Our kids have real problems they're dealing with every day. I have a son in high school, and the stuff he comes home and tells me is horrific. When I went to high school here, I never heard any of this kind of stuff. I never dealt with any of this kind of stuff. He's been in high school since August, and it's staggering to me the stuff he comes home and tells me that his friends and students at that school are dealing with. We have real problems that we need to address. So I've heard some of you say that adopting this rule is being proactive. That actually breaks my heart because I don't see anything proactive about a plan that relies solely on waiting for something horrible to happen and asking a teacher to shoot a kid. That's not proactive. That's just mind-boggling to me. So my kids, our kids, all kids deserve better than this kind of proactive plan. So, thank you.
Do we have any other takers? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you, everyone, for coming and participating. Again, we will be discussing this as a board in a work session and carefully going over all of the comments that we have received. It may take us more than one work session, but we will begin the process next week at 6 o'clock. You are certainly welcome to attend, but public comment will not be taken at that time. So I guess with that, we just need a motion to adjourn. Caleb seconds. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?